We'll just talk general ideas, what the concept of it was. Then I'll get down to going specifically through the story. Then we will actually get to where we can start talking down scenes. In the end, I want to end up with a list of scenes. And the way I work generally is I figure a code, a general measuring stick parameter. I can either come up with 30 scenes or 60 scenes, depending on which scale you want to work on. A 30 scene thing means that each scene is going to be around 4 pages long. A 61 means that every scene is going to run 20 pages long. It depends on, part of it is the knock some of these out, and this doesn't work out the way we thought it would. You can move things around, but it generally gives you an idea, assuming that what we really want at the end of all this is a 120-page script or less. But that's where we really want to go. Then we figure out vaguely what the pace of how fast it's going to move and how we're going to do it. I have a tendency to work rather mathematically about all this stuff. I found it easier, and it does lay things out, especially a thing like this. The basic premise is that it's sort of a serial-esque kind of movie, meaning that there are certain things that have to continue to happen. It's also basically an action piece for the most part. We want to keep things interspaced and at the same time build it. As I build this up, you'll see it's done vaguely by the numbers. Generally, the concept is a serial idea, done like the Republic serials, as a 30s serial, which is where a lot of stuff comes from anyway. One of the main ideas was to have, depending on whether it would be every 10 minutes or every 20 minutes, a sort of a cliffhanger situation that we get our hero into. If it's every 10 minutes, we do it 12 times. I think that may be a little much. 6 times is plenty.
And each cliffhanger is better than the one before.
That is the progression we have to do. It's hard to come up with. The trouble with cliffhangers is you get somebody into something, you sort of have to get them out in a plausible way, a believable way anyway. That's another important concept of the movie, that it be totally believable. It's a spaghetti western, only it takes place in the 30s. Or it's James Bond, and it takes place in the 30s. Except James Bond tends to get a little outrageous at times. We're going to take the unrealistic side of it off and make it more like the Clint Eastwood westerns. The thing with this is, we want to make a very believable character. We want him to be extremely good at what he does, as is the Clint Eastwood character or the James Bond character. James Bond and the Man with No Name were very good at what they did. They were very fast with a gun, they were very slick, they were very professional, they were supermen.
Like Mifune.
Yes, like Mifune. He's a real professional, he's really good. And that is the key to the whole thing. That's something you don't see that much anymore.
And one of the things that really helped Mifune in all the Kurosawa movies is that he was always surrounded by really inept characters, real silly buffoons, which made him so much more majestic. If there are occasions where he comes up against, not the arch villain, but the people around him
well, they shouldn't be
smartest.
buffoons. The one thing we're going to do is make a very good period piece that is realistic and believable. A 30s movie even in the Sam Spade genre. Even in the Maltese Falcon, there were some pretty goofy characters, but they were all pretty real in their own bizarre way.
Elijah Cook.
Elijah Cook might not have been the brightest person in the world. In a way, he was the buffoon of the piece. But at the same time, he was very dangerous, and they were strong characters. If we keep it that mode of believability...
Just like you don't put Lee Van Cleef as an accomplice to...
No, you put Eli Wallach. Did you see the good, the bad, and the ugly? The Eli Wallach character is a goofy character, but at the same time, he's very dangerous, and he's very funny, and we can have that kind of thing. The main thing is for him to be a superhero in the best sense of the word, which is John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, Sean Connery, tradition of a man who we can all look up to and say, now there's somebody who really knows his job, he's really good at what he does, and he's a very dangerous person, but at the same time, we're putting him in the kind of Bogart mold like Treasure of Sierra Madre, or...
Even the Clark Gable thing we talked about.
Yeah, the Clark Gable mold. The fact that he is slightly scruffy, you don't know it until it happens. Now, several aspects that we've discussed before. The image of him, which is the strongest image, is the Treasure of Sierra Madre outfit, which is the khaki pants. He's got the leather jacket, that sort of felt hat, and the pistol and holster with a World War I sort of flap over it. He's going into the jungle carrying his gun. The other thing we've added to him, which may be fun, is a bullwhip. That's really his trademark. That's really what he's good at. He has a pistol, and he's probably very good at that, but at the same time, he happens to be very good with a bullwhip. It's really more of a hobby than anything else. Maybe he came from Montana, someplace, and there are freaks who love bullwhips. They just do it all the time. It's a device that hasn't been used in a long time.
You can knock somebody's belt off and the guy's pants fall down.
You can swing over things. There are so many things you can do with it. I thought he carried it rolled up. It's like a samurai sword. He carries it back there and you don't even notice it. That way it's not in the way or anything. It's just there whenever he wants it.
At some point in the movie, he must use it to get a girl back who's walking out of the room. Wrap her up, and she twirls as he pulls her back. She spins into his arms. You have to use it for more things than just saving himself.
We'll have to work that part out. You know, in a way, it's important that it be a dangerous weapon. It looks sort of like a snake that's coiled up behind him, and anytime it strikes, it's a real threat.
Except there has to be that moment when he's alone with a can of beer and he just whips it to him.
That's the sort of gung-ho side of the character, which is if we make him sort of super samurai warrior, meaning that he is just incredibly good with a bullwhip and incredibly good with a gun. He's a dead-eye shot. He's got the wrong kind of holster for a quick draw, but we can always have him be a we're not going to use the quick draw aspects of it, but he should be very fast and very quick. Maybe even this has to do with the other part of this character, but I was thinking of kung fu, karate, but I don't want to load him up too much. The reason I was doing this is that his character is international. He's the guy who's been all around the world. He's a soldier of fortune. He is also... Well, this gets into that other side of his character, which is totally alien to that side we just talked about. Essentially, I think he is and this was the original character, and it's an interesting juxtaposition. He is an archaeologist and an anthropologist. A PhD, he's a doctor, he's a college professor. What happened is he's also a sort of rough and tumble guy. But he got involved in going in and getting antiquities, sort of searching out antiquities. And it became a very lucrative profession. So he, rather than be an archaeologist, he became sort of an outlaw archaeologist. He really started being a grave robber for hire, is what it really came down to. And the museums would hire him to steal things out of tombs and stuff, or locate them. In the archaeology circles, he knows everybody, so he's sort of like a private detective grave robber. The museum will give him an assignment, a bounty hunter.
If there were these Arabs who just discovered some great king's tomb, and you see the tomb being taken out, and there are about 20 or 30 Arabs heavily armed and like 5 trucks, and you realize there's this one guy who's all painted, and he's one of the pall bearers who slips a thing into the back of the truck, gets behind the wheel, and as the caravan is going to turn right, this one thing goes left. And the rest chase him, but he gets away.
The thing is, if there is an object of antiquity that a museum knows about that may be missing, or they know it's somewhere, he can go like an archaeologist, but it's like, rather than doing research, he goes in to get the gold. He doesn't really go to find cheap artifacts. He goes to gather stuff. And the other thing is, if something was taken from a tomb, stolen, and sort of in the underground, sometimes they may send him out to get it. Essentially, he's a bounty hunter. He's a bounty hunter of antiquities, is what it comes down to. You know, if a museum says that there is this famous vase that we know exists, it was in this tomb at this time. It may still be there, but we doubt it. We think maybe it's on the underground market or in a private collection. We'd like to have it. Actually, it belongs to us. We're the National Museum of Cairo or something. He says, okay, and he tracks it down. If it's not in the thing, he finds out who's got it. And he swipes it back. But a lot of times it's sort of legal. All he has to do is get it. It's not like he steals things from collectors and then gives them to other collectors. What he does is steal things from private collectors who have them illegally and gives them back to the national museums and stuff. Or being that his morality isn't all that good, he will go into the actual grave and steal it out of the country and give it to the museum. It's a sort of quasi-ethical side of that whole thing. The museum does commission somebody to go into the pyramids and, whatever they find, sort of get out without the Egyptian government knowing, because they were in the process of turmoil, and nobody's going to know anyway, and there's not going to be any official protest. So just do it. Anything that's quasi-legal or amorphous, he'll do. He's not a totally corrupt person where he'll steal. But if it's sort of fair game, then he comes in. And as a result, he's essentially an anthropologist and an archaeologist. He is a professor. He knows antiquities, so nobody can pawn off a fake on him. He understands all that stuff. But he really got, the adventure bug, and he just kept doing it. And it was good money. He gets a big commission on the stuff, a big bounty. So he just got into this crazy business. Now, on top of that, I thought it would be interesting to have him be a sort of expert in the occult as an offshoot of the anthropological side of this thing. He has a tendency to get into situations where there are taboos, voodoos, things, especially when you start dealing with pyramids, you get into all that. So he sort of studies it because he's gotten mixed up with it. A study of ancient religions and voodoo and all that kind of stuff. He's a guy who sort of checks out ghosts and psychic phenomenon in connection with the kind of things he does. He's a sort of archaeological exorcist. When somebody has a haunted house or a haunted temple and nobody will go near it, he is the one who will go in there and do it. And he has dealt with, assuming that he believes in the supernatural because he deals with it, he is the one they send into the haunted house, like one of these haunted house professors who try and figure out why a house is haunted. He does that. He gets involved with sacred temples and curses and all that stuff. And actually, some were real. He came across some real curses and stuff. He said, hey, this is really interesting. A lot of the times, they are hoaxes. And he can figure it out. This is just a general history of where he comes from. People will use the pharaohs or a curse, and something will happen. People will walk through this particular temple, and they will die 24 hours later. Nobody knows why. The curse of Mobutu is on that place. Well, he looks at it and sees that there's a fissure in the thing, and there's a deadly gas that's coming out of the ground. Because he's an intelligent professor, he knows his science, and he can sort of deduce a hoax. There was a comic book a long time ago about a guy who did nothing but show up hoaxes. It was like Ripley's Believe It or Not. They would send things to this guy. They would send him 8-legged dogs and stuff. It was like a TV show. If you couldn't figure out how the hoax was done, then it would be on the show. It was all him trying to show these complicated ways that people come up with hoaxes. That was just a sidelight. When he confronts his antiquities and stuff, half the time he's dealing with hoaxes. Not only hoaxes in terms of taboos and things, but also hoaxes in terms of the antiquities. Now, they send him out to get them, but they also send him out to deal with the supernatural.
Some of the hoaxes may have been set up by the natives.
Yeah. They may be an original native thing, or it might be some shyster in town who thinks he's going to pull a fast one on somebody for various reasons. It's a milieu I've created for this guy that I think is interesting because it also makes him somewhat of a ghost chaser in his own way. I don't know actually how much of that aspect of it will fit into the script. It's something I've added to the character.
He's bound to run into those kind of things.
Yes. The thing is, if he is an intelligent sort of professor who has experience with the occult and that kind of thing, then he not only is not afraid to stand up against any man, but he's also not afraid to stand up against the unknown.
If he walks into a cave and he adds a yellow slash to a symbol, you don't have to say too much about how he found that out, you know.
We've established that he's a college professor. It doesn't have to be done in a strong way. It starts out in a museum. They just call him Doctor this and Doctor that. We can very easily make that transition and very quickly establish that whole side of his character. In the story, the ramifications of him as a ghost hunter have not been dealt with yet, but I put it in his character for use in some other way.
It seems like it would be nice if, once stripped of his bullwhip, left him weak if we had to worry. Just a little worried about him being too... But I put it in his character for use in some other way.
That was what I thought. That's why I was sort of iffy about throwing it in. If we don't make him vulnerable...
What's he afraid of? He's got to be afraid of something.
If we don't make him vulnerable, he's got no problems. We'll shut that idea for now. The other thing, which is like the kung fu and the ghost thing, which, given the plot and the way it's working, there's not really time to cope with it in an interesting way. It's a nice aspect of this thing. Might be able to deal with it, might not. It's not really that important. It's the same thing with the kung fu. We might be stacking too much into his character that is not necessary. Just the fact that he's good with a bullwhip is going to be fun enough. You could fill a script. In one way, it's better to keep it clean.
As long as he has brains, he should be able to talk his way out of things.
I think that would be his first choice.
Right.
The guy should be a great gambler, too.
Assume there's an archaeologist who spent years studying this. He might have some kind of awe and respect for virgin tombs. This guy has obviously gone past that into, I can make a good living out of this. What's his stance on this? Does it bother him to go in and...
I think basically he's very cynical about the whole thing. Maybe he thinks that most archaeologists are just full of shit and that somebody's going to rip this stuff off anyway. Better that he rips it off and gets it to a museum where people can study it and rip it off right. That's the key also. He knows how to enter a tomb without destroying it. He knows what's important. He knows not to go in there like a bull in a china shop and destroy half the stuff that's valuable.
He should have a mentor in this, somebody you never see, but he refers to from time to time, somebody you want to see, the man who taught him everything, the man who gave him whatever power he has now. Maybe some supreme archaeologist who's maybe 90 years old, like Max von Sydow, and is dying now. So you know it didn't start with this guy. There are other greater predecessors around of this sort.
Is it necessary that he really be trained?
It's not absolutely necessary. I just thought it would be amusing if people could call him a doctor.
I like that. The doctor with the bullwhip.
It's such an odd juxtaposition, especially going around. The first sequence is in the jungle, and you see him in action. You see him going through the whole thing. And the next sequence after that, you see him back in Washington or New York, back in the museum, where he's in a, totally academic thing, turning over this thing that he's got. Then in the rest of the movie, you see him back in his bullwhip mode. You understand that there's more to him. Plus it justifies later things that the fact that he's sort of an intelligent guy. Peter Falk is one way of looking at him, a Humphrey Bogart character. The fact that he's sort of scruffy and not the right image, but...
Peter's too scruffy.
Yes, we'll figure a way of laying that out in his personality so it's easily identifiable.
Remember the movie Soldier of Fortune with Clark Gable? There was a good deal of Rhett Butler in that character, the devil-may-care kind of guy who can handle situations. He's so damn glib, he bluffs everybody around. People think that he's a pushover. He's challenged, and he always appears like a pushover, but in fact he's not. He likes to set himself up in these subordinate roles from time to time to get his way.
What I'm saying is that character just would not fit in a college classroom, or even as an archaeologist. He's too much of a scruffy character to settle down. A playboy, or however you want to do it. He's too much of a wise guy, maybe that's a better way to say it, to actually be a college professor. He really loves the stuff, but he became too cynical. He's too much of a wise guy to fit into an academic situation or even an archaeological situation. He's really too much of an adventurer at heart. He just loves it. So he obviously took this whole bent that was different because it's just more fun. He just can't settle down. It's a nice contrast. It's like the James Bond thing. instead of being a martini drinking cultured kind of sophisticate, he's the sort of intellectual college professor James Bond. He's a super agent.
If you want to see or hear more of the transcript, please donate to the link below. I wish I could complete this without money, but I can't afford to be a communist. Sorry.